This video will prepare you for both tests in the GACE Elementary Education Assessment. If you want to guarantee you'll pass, check out our full-length study guide here or in the description below. Let's get into it.
This video is going to prepare you for the GACE Elementary Education Subtest 1, which covers language arts and social studies. This is one of the tests you'll take to teach elementary school in Georgia. In this video, we're going to cover 3 things: what's on the test and how to study for it, the biggest concepts to know for test day, and we're going to look at a few practice questions. Let's jump right into it. Now, the GACE Elementary Subtest 1 can be broken into 3 sub-areas: reading and language arts, social studies, and analysis. Each sub-area is worth a certain percentage of the exam. Sub-areas 1 and 2 are comprised of multiple choice questions, while sub-area 3 includes 2 constructed response questions, which are just like essays. Each sub-area has objectives that give more detail about what will be covered in your exam. However, in this video, we're only going to cover 1 key concept from each objective. The first objective is all about reading. You'll need to know how to develop students' comprehension skills, both for literary and informational text. This is huge and super important. Learning how to understand what they read is one of the most essential skills students develop in elementary school. And we have plenty of information of this in the study guide. But for now, let's zoom in on the different levels of comprehension. You need to know the difference between literal, inferential, and evaluative comprehension. And you'll need to be able to recognize which strategies or types of questioning are best to develop each kind of comprehension. To build literal comprehension, work on things like summarizing and identifying plot elements, like setting. For inferential comprehension, help students recognize cause and effect relationships and make predictions. To develop evaluative comprehension, model metacognition and help students make opinions about the text. To practice many of these skills, I loved using graphic organizers. When my team planned a reading lesson, I'd always say, "I've got a graphic organizer for that." So I wasn't as popular as the teacher who always brought in donuts, but I still know how to have a good time. This is great information for you to better understand Objective 1. And now, let's move on to Objective 2. This one is all about understanding and applying foundational skills. More specifically, you will need to know about literacy development and fluency, and of course, the role fluency plays to support comprehension. There's so much packed in here, I don't even know where to start. I know. I'll let the wheel of literacy skills decide for me. Now, you don't have to play this kind of game when it comes to your test prep. You can get a 240 study guide and have everything you need at your fingertips. The study guide is full of instructional content, including flashcards and videos, and questions, with a full-length practice test, all aligned to your exam. But since we can't cover everything in this video, let's have a little fun and spin the wheel. Perfect! Phonological awareness is definitely something you'll want to know for this objective. Let's take a peek inside our study guide and see one of those videos I mentioned before.
Phonological awareness is an umbrella term that includes the ability to hear individual words, syllables, and sounds in spoken language. If you're aware that words can be broken into parts, then you already have some phonological awareness. Before learning to read, children must recognize that words are made up of phonemes, or sounds of speech. There is often a misunderstanding that phonemic awareness and phonological awareness are the same. Phonemic awareness is essentially a subcategory of phonological awareness. Phonological awareness encompasses the ability to recognize individual phonemes, but also syllables and words. Phonemic awareness refers only to the ability to hear and use individual units of sounds or phonemes. Phonological awareness typically develops in a simple to complex progression. Let's use stair steps to demonstrate how phonological awareness skills build. Rhyme awareness is the ability to hear when words rhyme or sound the same at the end, and alliteration is the ability to identify when words have the same first sound. Think of rhymes like blue and flu, and alliteration like candy and cookie.
I love studying with videos, don't you? Okay, let's keep moving to the third objective. This one is all about helping students through the writing process. You'll need to apply this to different types of writing and know about resources that can help students produce and publish writing. The likelihood of seeing questions about the stages of the writing process is high, so let's really dig in here. The stages are pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, and publishing. Revising and editing are so easy to mix up, so let's go over these two in detail. Revising entails reviewing the draft and making adjustments to improve the content of the writing. This is the time to make sure the writing clearly addresses the purpose and audience. Improvements to the organization and word choice are also made here. Details are analyzed to determine if there are any that should be added, deleted, changed, or moved to support the overall clarity of the writing piece. Now, editing also entails reviewing the draft, but this time, focusing on improving the conventions of the writing. This is the time to zero in on proper grammar, spelling, punctuation, and capitalization, and making corrections to those as needed. In simple terms, revising improves content, editing corrects conventions. All right, I honestly could write a whole book about this. Or maybe a study guide. Let's just move on to Objective 4, which is all about speaking, listening, and presenting. You'll need to know how to help students collaborate in conversation, as well as participate as both a speaker and audience member in grade-appropriate presentations. Did you know there is a best type of listening to facilitate in your classroom? It's the active kind. Active listeners are engaged in what is being said and respond to the speaker to improve communication. Let's go over some of the verbs commonly associated with active listening. Active listeners encourage the speaker by using nonverbal communication, such as eye contact and subtle head nods to indicate interest. Active listeners can paraphrase the speaker's message by putting it in their own words. They can also summarize the presentation by reducing it to the main points. Active listeners monitor their own understanding and clarify ideas by asking the speaker questions if needed. They also reflect on the speaker's message by thinking carefully about it and maybe even evaluate it by assessing its quality. I can tell you actively listen to all the information and are ready to move on onto the last reading and language arts objective on this exam. And if not, feel free to rewind. Or even better, subscribe to the study guide. You can go over all the info there as many times as you'd like. All right, here we go into Objective 5. This one is all about English language grammar and vocabulary development. You'll need to know the conventions of standard English, like punctuation and spelling, and how to help students determine the meaning of unknown words. Most vocabulary is actually learned indirectly. Teachers should expose students to targeted words in multiple contexts. A great way to do this is to plan a thematic or integrated unit, so you can provide your students with lots of different opportunities to read, write, hear, and speak using the new terms. The more times a student works with a vocabulary word, the more likely they are to make connections between those contexts and internalize the meaning of the word. You've made it through the reading and language arts objectives. You are doing great. The first objective in the social studies sub-area is all about where social studies information comes from and teaching students how to process it. So this one leans more towards pedagogy and social studies skills versus content knowledge. You'll see questions about finding and evaluating sources, teaching research skills, and teaching students how to interpret what they've learned. The rest of the objectives in this sub-area focus on content knowledge, but we will return to pedagogy concepts in sub-area 3, so keep an eye out for more on this later. Objective 2 requires you to demonstrate your history knowledge and skills. These questions only cover US and Georgia history, so no panic. You will not be required to study world history for this test. History questions will focus on important events and figures throughout US and Georgia history, Native American culture in North America, causes and effect of key events like the American Revolution, factors that shaped development during the colonial period, and issues related to the founding and development of U.S. democracy. Need to brush up on all of that? We have it covered for you in the study guide. Objective 3 is all about geography. These questions will focus on how U.S. geography impacted human settlement and development, and also basic knowledge of maps and how to use them. This is one of the most narrow objectives, which makes studying for it fairly straightforward. But these questions can also feel a bit complex because they often require you to draw on geography, history, and cultural content knowledge to find the right answer. Let's look at an example. You might see a geography question that asks about Native American groups in a certain region and how they used and adapted the land. Even though this is a geography question, you will likely need to draw on both your history content knowledge and your U.S. geography knowledge to answer this question. That may sound tricky, but our materials are designed to help you make natural connections between geography and history. Check this out.
The Native Americans were several distinct tribes, varied in their economic and cultural practices. The geography of their regions and the available resources greatly impacted their shelter, food sources, and general way of life. The eastern woodlands region consisted of fertile wooded lands, rivers, and streams. These geographic features made inland farming, coastal farming, and fishing the primary ways these native groups grew and acquired food. The location of this region also led to early contact with European explorers. Notable tribes from this region include the Iroquoian-speaking Iroquois and the Algonquian-speaking Pequot. Let's stay east and explore the area to the south. The southeast region had a humid climate and fertile land. These factors made agriculture important for the tribes who lived there. They settled in permanent villages to tend to their crops.
Human history and geography can and should be understood alongside one another. That video and others like it in our guide can help you ace questions that pull from different disciplines to find the right answer. Stick around for the practice questions in the last portion of this video for more on interdisciplinary questions. Let's move on to Objective 4. The government and economics questions will focus on your knowledge of key U.S. documents and figures, rights granted to citizens under the Constitution, and key principles of American democracy. Now, under the economics portion of the test, you will need to know the 4 productive resources, which are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, the functions and roles of the 4 major sectors of the economy, and personal spending basics. Okay, you made it through the content-focused sub-areas. Remember how I said that the last sub-area gets back into pedagogy? Stay with me and we will tackle it together. Remember, this one is different because it just consists of 2 constructed response questions. One of those questions will be about how to teach English language arts, and the other will be about teaching social studies. One of them might even ask you about integrating the subject areas, but both will test your knowledge of curriculum planning, instructional design, or assessment and evaluation. Be prepared to be asked for specific strategies to use in one of these areas. Also, each question will give you a specific classroom scenario, like a description of a social studies lesson a teacher is teaching, or maybe a language arts work sample from a student. You will be asked to evaluate that information, or to describe a strategy or method that the teacher should use. The good news is, these are pretty brief. We recommend you spend between 10 and 15 minutes on each one. Now, the best way to prepare for the CRQs is to answer some practice questions. I've got a sample English language arts question ready for you. We don't have time to do a practice social studies question in this video, but rest assured, the 240 study guide includes practice questions with sample responses for both of the CRQs, so you will be all set for test day. Here is our question. So it's the beginning of 1st grade and the student is reading aloud. Here is their running record. We're going to be thinking about those foundational skills we mentioned back in sub-area 1. We need to identify a strength and a weakness of that student's oral reading. Then, we need to choose a strategy we would use to tackle that weakness. Let's focus on the running record. The errors stand out, so let's determine this student's weakness first. Look, most of their errors are on words that begin with CR. That is a consonant blend. They change it to CL or drop the C altogether. So yep, they definitely need to work on reading initial consonant blends. We've got our weakness. Let's quickly find a strength. Well, we know this student is just starting first grade. I can see here that they read lots of simple kindergarten sight words correctly, like by and this. Let's name sight words as a strength. Let's go back to our question. Okay, we have a strength and a need. Now it's time to choose an instructional strategy to help that student with that need. What can we do to teach initial consonant blends? Think about phonics activities in a small group. There could be many correct answers. I'm going to suggest a word sort. Giving this student cards with CR and CL words on them would allow the teacher to help the student read them correctly and differentiate between them. Here's how I would write that up as a complete response. Notice that I wrote one short paragraph for each task. You can get straight to the point. No need for an introduction or closing. And that's how you tackle the constructed response questions. Remember, no matter what scenario you're given, your goal is to show that you know how to apply your knowledge of both content and teaching methods to help students succeed. Now, let's look at some practice multiple choice questions to show you how those objectives can appear on the test. Here's one from our first reading and language arts objective. Mrs. Wright is reading a fiction story aloud to her class. She stops throughout to model the think aloud strategy. In her think aloud moments, she makes predictions about what will happen next and reflects on what the characters learn throughout each plot event. What level of reading comprehension is she modeling for her students? Literal comprehension, evaluative comprehension, inferential comprehension, circumstantial comprehension. Okay, right off the bat, we know that circumstantial comprehension isn't even one of the levels of comprehension, so we can ignore that one. This is the right one. The teacher was modeling the ability to understand what was read without it being stated explicitly, which is inferential comprehension. She is using her background knowledge along with what is happening in the story to make inferences about what might happen next and what the characters learn. Let's go to a question from Objective 2. This is all about fluency, one of those so important foundational reading skills. A selection of students has been called aside for individual instruction based on the area they struggled in on a recent assessment. The teacher presents the students with a simple sentence such as, "The cat ran very fast." The teacher reads the sentence one word at a time with no intonation or expression. Then, she models how when people read and speak, it is natural to emphasize certain words in the sentence. She tells the group, "Today, we will be working on adding emphasis to a sentence and thinking about the effect that has on our understanding. I will call on you and tell you what word to emphasize, and then you will say the sentence, saying that specific word strongly." The teacher models once again, this time reading, "The cat ran very fast." Based on the nature of this activity, which area of reading fluency did these students need additional instruction in? Prosody, accuracy, speed, automaticity. Now, I initially thought the answer was automaticity, but nope, not this time. Through the question feedback in the study guide, I can see that automaticity is the ability to read words effortlessly. This activity is focusing on how to emphasize words and how that changes the meaning of a sentence, which would fall into the realm of prosody. What about a question from the writing objective? What might that look like? Students in a 5th grade class have been working on writing biographies about important people from history. Today's Writers' Workshop activity required them to reread their writing and identify ideas that need elaboration or clarification. They have also been asked to consider the organization of their essay to ensure the information is presented in a logical order. Which stage of the writing process are these students working in? Drafting, editing, revision, publishing. Ooh, I remember going over this earlier. Since the students are evaluating and making adjustments to the content of their writing, choice C, revision, is the one we want. Now, let's look at a vocabulary question. How can a 4th grade teacher indirectly expose her students to content-specific vocabulary that they will need in their upcoming unit as part of indirect and direct vocabulary instruction over the terms? Provide students with a list to define each word before the unit begins? Purposefully and frequently use the terms in class? Encourage students to use dictionaries when they come across unfamiliar words? Require students to find examples of the words used in the real world? This is the best choice. Purposefully and frequently using the terms in class will naturally expose them to the words and provide context for how they are used in a sentence. Since the teacher isn't directly defining or teaching these terms, it would be one of the various ways to indirectly expose them to the new vocabulary. Now, let's switch gears for a minute and try a couple of social studies questions. Let's start with a good old-fashioned history question. Which of the following rights did British colonists in the United States advocate for in the 1770s? Based on the year stated in the question, we know that we're talking about the events leading up to the American Revolution. So, let's use what we know about the causes of the American Revolution to see if we can rule out any options right away. Choice A is related to tariffs, which we know were a big part of the causes of the war. So, let's keep that one in the running. Choice B is plausible, but if you remember your colonial history, you can be pretty sure that the American colonies were producing raw materials, not asking for more to be imported. I think we can rule this one out. Choice C is about representation. You probably remember that no taxation without representation was an important part of the Boston Tea Party and other inciting events. So that one is definitely a possibility. And D is about US currency, which didn't even exist at that time. So that one is definitely wrong. So, choosing between A and C, I'm going to choose C because we know that representation was an important issue leading to the revolution. We reasoned through the choices and found the correct answer. It's C. Using process of elimination is an important strategy for selected response question. Let's move out of history and try our hand at a geography question. Remember how human development is part of the geography objective? This question is about how geographical factors have impacted settlement in the US. Which of the original 13 colonies is well known for being a trade hub due to its geographical features? This one is tricky because you need to use what you know about what geographical features were helpful for trade, major physical features of the US, and characteristics of the 13 colonies. So using what we know about geography, human use of the environment, and the colonies, we can determine that A, New York is the correct answer. Are you ready for your last practice question? Let's focus on government for this one. The Constitution includes a list of actions Congress may not do, prohibited powers. What motivated the framers of the Constitution to include this list on the document? I think B is the best answer choice here. The prohibited powers were meant to keep Congress from becoming tyrannical. This makes sense based on what we know about the relationship between American colonists and the British government before the Revolution. Whoa, that was so much to throw at you in one little video, but you made it through. Congratulations! If you found this video helpful, give it a like. And remember, this video is meant to help you understand what is on your exam, but there's still so much to do. This video is going to prepare you for the GACE Elementary Education Subtest 2, which covers math, science, health, PE, and the arts. This is one of the tests you'll take to teach elementary school in Georgia. And this video is going to cover 3 things: what's on the test and how to study for it, the biggest concepts to know for test day, and we're gonna look at a few practice questions. So let's get started. Now, the GACE Elementary Subtest 2 can be broken into 3 sub-areas: mathematics, science, health education, physical education, and the arts. Each sub-area is worth a certain percentage of the exam, and unlike Subtest 1, there are no essay questions here, just 75 multiple choice questions. Each sub-area has objectives that give more detail about what will be covered on your exam. We will go over one key concept from each objective. Now, if you want to see everything this exam covers, get a 240 study guide. The link is below. But for now, let's take it from the top and talk about some of the most important things to know. The first objective is all about counting and cardinality. This covers the basics of understanding numbers. So you'll need to know how to help students compare and order the different numbers they're working with. So just the literal foundation of all other math skills. No pressure. This is where the 240 study guide comes in handy. We've got all you need to know. But for now, let's look at one skill we know is going to come up. You'll need to be able to compare fractions and decimals to whole numbers. So you may be asked, which is greater, 4/5 or 0.7? To answer this question, we need to have both numbers be either a fraction or a decimal. You could take 4 divided by 5, which is equal to 0.8. But you don't have access to a calculator on this exam. So let's keep it simple and stick with fractions. Since 0.7 represents 7/10, you can turn it into a fraction of 7/10. Great, both fractions. But before we can compare both fractions, we need them to have the same denominator. So 4/5, then multiply both the top and the bottom number by 2. Then get 8/10. Either way you do it, we can see that 0.8 is larger than 0.7 and that 8/10 is larger than 7/10. So 4/5 is larger than 0.7. Got it? Now let's see a need to know for objective 2. This one is all about the operations used to solve equations. More specifically, you'll need to know the rules and properties that tell you what to do when solving a math problem. Ooh, the operational properties show up here a lot. Let's look at the big 3 together. The commutative property says that an operation is commutative if changing the order of the values involved does not change the outcome. Addition and multiplication are commutative. 5 plus 3 is the same as 3 plus 5, and 5 times 3 is the same as 3 times 5. If the values in an expression can be regrouped, but will yield the same outcome as with the original grouping, it is said to be associative. Addition and multiplication are associative. No matter where the grouping symbols appear in these examples, the outcome is the same. The distributive property states that multiplying a factor with a sum is equal to multiplying that factor with each term of that sum separately, and then finding the sum afterward. I know. Did I lose you on that one? It sounds more complicated than it is, I promise. Say I have 3 times the quantity of 40 plus 8. I can either do the adding first and do 3 times 48, or I can add at the end. So 3 times 40 and 3 times 8. Then put them together. Either way, same answer. That last one is really helpful when you're doing mental math. You can solve the problem in the way that is easiest for your brain to do without a calculator. Okay, let's get moving to the third objective. This place value objective is all about, well, you guessed it, place value. That means you'll need to understand a place value chart like this one and the value each digit within a larger number holds. For example, the digit 7 appears in each of these 3 numbers, but it holds a different value in each of them. In 5,237, the 7 is in the ones place and has the value of 7. In 7,852, 7 is in the thousands place and has a value of 7,000. And in 82 and 47 thousandths, 7 is in the thousandths place and has a value of 0.007. On to objective 4, fractions. I know, everyone's favorite, right? Don't worry, you've got this. You'll need to be able to add, subtract, and multiply fractions. Oh, we've got a great video on this in our study guide. Want to see it?
To multiply two fractions, you first multiply the numerators, the top numbers, to get the numerator in the product. Then you multiply the denominators, the bottom numbers, to get the product's denominator. Let's work a problem as an example. What is 1/2 times 3/4? The numerators are 1 and 3. 1 times 3 equals 3, which will be the numerator. The denominators are 2 and 4. 2 times 4 equals 8, which will be the denominator. So the answer is 3/8. Notice that the product 3/8 is smaller than both original fractions, 1/2 and 3/4.
Our study guides are packed with videos from our fantastic tutors, just like that one. They walk you through the content step by step. Here we are at the 5th objective, measurement and data. A lot of what you'll see in the data section are the measures of central tendency. So we're talking mean, median, mode, and range. 5 students have their height measured. The data set is 158, 155, 164, 155, 168. What is the mean, median, mode, and range? Okay, first, rearrange the data set from least to greatest. The mean is the average. So all these numbers added up, divided by the number of data points, or in this case 5, gives us 160. The median is the middle value, so 158. The mode, that is the number that appears most often. Since the value 155 appears twice, that is our mode. Finally, the range, that is the largest value minus the smallest value. So 168 minus 155, you got it. Our range is 13. In this section, you'll not only need to analyze the data, like we just did together, but you'll also need to be able to interpret the data. Basically, determine what conclusion can you draw from the numbers in front of you. We are on our last math objective, geometry. You might be asking me, Lyd, I thought I was teaching elementary students. Why do I need to know geometry? Well, let me tell you, friend. Geometry can refer to anything that has to do with the measurement and properties of shapes. So, even if you're just finding area and perimeter of a rectangle, you are doing geometry. Let's do a little refresher on area and perimeter while we're here. Remember that the area of a shape is the surface inside a figure. Perimeter is the distance around the outside of that figure. So you'll want to brush up on some of the formulas used to calculate area and perimeter. Here's a list of the most common ones. You've made it through the entire math section. You, my friend, are doing great. Now, can we just pause for a moment and recognize you for putting in the time to start preparing for your GACE exam? I am so proud of you. All right, enough mushy stuff. Back to business and onto my personal favorite, science. In the science portion of the test, you will see that we've got an objective that focuses on each of the 3 big areas of science: Earth, physical, and life. But before we get to those, we've got to talk about the nature of science. This objective is all about the big overarching rules about how to do science. So we're talking about thinking scientifically, how to conduct scientific inquiry, and how to communicate scientific ideas with a larger community. Let's take a closer look at inquiry. That seems to come up a lot. Inquiry-based learning centers around developing and answering questions or solving problems from the real-world perspective. Students learn as they develop investigations, perform experiments, and seek answers with teacher-guided conversations and activities. Real science involves discovery and investigation. So, if we want to teach students to think like real scientists, they have to do science, not just read about it or listen to it. I got a little something for you on how we're gonna go over this in our study guide. You wanna see it? Let's head into the guide.
During the inquiry process, students develop the habits and skills of science as well as the ability to think critically. Students tend to understand more deeply, retain more information, and be more engaged when they discover answers themselves, in context, using hands-on direct experiences that can be connected to previously built knowledge and related to real-world situations.
So, here is a tip. Any chance you get to have students experiment with their hands, collect their own data, and generally just try to figure things out on their own, that is the best. Next on the list, earth science. In this section, you'll need to know about the cycles and processes that occur on Earth. This includes short cycles like day and night, all the way up to processes that take millions of years, like plate tectonics. Let's take a closer look at the last one. Plate tectonics is the large-scale movement of portions of the Earth's crust over long periods of time. And when two plates meet, that's called a boundary. There are 3 kinds of plate boundaries. When 2 plates move towards each other, it is called a convergent boundary. As one plate is pushed below the other, the lower plate becomes part of the mantle. This is a destructive process because part of the plate is being destroyed. If 2 plates move away from each other, it's called a divergent boundary. This is a constructive process because as those 2 plates move away from each other, material from the mantle comes up to fill the gap, creating new land. And finally, if 2 plates push past each other in opposite directions, it is called a transform boundary. Just like that, we're halfway through science. Next on the list is physical science. You'll need to be able to describe objects in terms of their properties, which is just a different way of saying you'll need to know the characteristics of matter. Let's start with naming the states of matter: solids, liquids, and gases. The properties of each include knowing that a solid has a fixed volume and shape. A liquid, it has a fixed volume, but not a fixed shape. And a gas has neither. Not a fixed volume, not a fixed shape. And in the study guide, we've got all the information you need to know in a graphic like this one, or in a video like the one you saw earlier. So guess what? You can choose how you want to learn. You'll also need to know physical and chemical changes of matter, like when an ice cube melts or a candle burns. Also, how to classify matter into elements, compounds, and mixtures. Ready to tackle life science? Now, just a heads up. There is a lot in this life science objective. You'll need to know the characteristics of living and non-living things, understand the growth and development life cycle of different living things and the habitats of organisms. You will also need to understand the relationships between organisms and how they respond to their environment. And finally, understand inherited traits, learn behaviors versus adaptations, and any other factors that affect the survival of organisms. All done. Just kidding. But you do need to know all of what I just mentioned. So let's get you started. You need to be able to tell if something is alive. So how do you know if something is alive or living? Well, something that is alive is made of cells, responds to stimuli from its environment, maintains homeostasis, grows and develops, reproduces, and has a metabolism. If it doesn't meet all these criteria, it is not alive. But like you saw before, there's so much more to know just in this objective alone. So you could spend your time Googling your heart out, or you could just check out the 240 study guide. Hey, we're almost there. Hang with me. Last area we need to cover: health education, physical education, and the arts, starting with health and PE. This section is all about how to live a healthy lifestyle. It covers everything from diet and exercise to disease prevention and mental health. So you'll want to know the basics, like the FDA's current dietary guidelines. Check out this graphic. It is the My Plate image. It shows the relative portion sizes of each type of food for a balanced meal. We made it to the last objective, art, and they mean all of the arts. So you'll need to know the basics of dance, music, theater, and visual art. A good starting place here is visual art, specifically the color wheel. The primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. If you mix two of those together, you get a secondary color of orange, green, or purple. And don't stop there. If you mix a primary and a secondary color together, you get a tertiary color. And that's it. We've made it through all the content. Let's look at some practice questions now to show you how those concepts we just went over can appear on the test. Hey, looking for extra questions? Check out our plan to pass. It will guide you every step of the way. Now for some practice questions. Here's one from the place value objective. What is the value of the 7 in the number 432 and 769 10,000ths? The 7 is the second number after the decimal, so it has the value of 7 hundredths, or 7 divided by 100. So this is the correct answer. What about a fractions question? Which of the following principles is demonstrated by the figures below? First thing to notice is that all of these figures have the same denominator, or the number on the bottom of the fraction. Looking at the shaded areas of each circle and the number they match up with, this is the best answer. The denominator remains 4 throughout the figures. As the numerator decreases, the fraction also decreases. Now, for objective 4, the one on measurement and data. The number of inches of snowfall in Selbyville is graphed in the bar chart below. What is the mean number of inches of snowfall per month from November to March? To find the mean, we need to add up all values and divide by the number of values in the dataset. So, 5 plus 7 plus 9 plus 8 plus 1, which equals 30. There are 5 data points, so 30 divided by 5 gives us 6. So this one is correct. Last one for math? Geometry. We're told the west wall of a square room has a length of 13 feet, and they want the perimeter of the entire room. Well, squares have 4 sides of equal measure. So the perimeter, the area around the figure, would be 4 times 13, which is, you got it, 52. On to science, starting with objective 1 and inquiry. Which of the following activities best illustrates an activity related to using scientific inquiry in the classroom? A. Presenting a testable question and having students follow lab instructions to determine the answer. B. Providing students with various materials and lab equipment and asking them to use them to see what they can find out. C. Helping students identify a problem and develop testable questions that might lead to a solution. Or D. Permitting students to search the internet as they fill in the blanks on a science worksheet. An engaging part of scientific inquiry is allowing students to participate in the process of identifying problems to solve and asking questions that might lead to a solution. So, C is the best answer. What about a physical science question? Let's check one out. A solid gold bar is melted in a smelter. Which of the following statements correctly compares the volume of the solid bar to the volume of the liquid gold? Well, volume is a measure of space occupied. Although both have the same number of molecules, the heat needed to melt the gold increases the spaces between the molecules in the liquid. The liquid will have a greater volume, so this is the best answer. Let's look at a life science question. The survival of any living thing is directly dependent upon air, water, shelter, and which of the following? Carbon dioxide, sunlight, sexual reproduction, or nutrition? Both reproduction and nutrition were on the list we looked at earlier. But the key here is that not all organisms use sexual reproduction. Some actually reproduce asexually, so D is the best answer. And finally, let's round out our questions with one from Health and PE. Which of the following systems in humans is the primary barrier for foreign particles? Respiratory, digestive, reproductive, or integumentary? The correct answer is integumentary, because it includes the body's skin, which forms a barrier between the human and its environment. Now that's just a small sampling of practice questions to give you an idea about how these concepts are assessed on the test. Hey, congratulations on finishing the video. If you found it helpful, give it a like. There's plenty more to learn. Did you know that our study guide has hundreds of practice questions? If you really want to make sure you're prepared for the GACE Elementary Education Subtest 2, take the next step now and subscribe to the 240 study guide. It has hours of videos, so you can watch and or listen wherever you are. And most of all, it is test aligned, so you know precisely what you need to study. Remember, it has hundreds of practice questions, so you can be sure you're ready. So click on the link below right now to get started.